Hi everyone, welcome. I'm preparing to check in on these two systems here. There are a couple bins with African night crawlers living in them. ANC is my abbreviation for African night crawler. And it was only 6 days ago that we set them up the way you see them here, with the material that had been in the system pushed all the way to the far edge, and then the edge that's closest to us configured with what I refer to as a horizontal migration feeding zone. And I guess with the material over there being pretty much depleted of bedding and food, and at this point left uncovered to allow it to also begin getting depleted of its moisture content, we've done everything in our power, or a great number of many things in our power, to try to motivate the worms to move out and come over to this edge of the bin, where this horizontal migration feeding zone was set up with some nice fresh bedding, a whole bunch of moisture, even half of a mango and some coffee was placed in here to get them to come over, or at least if they do make their way over, to stay. And after 6 days, I've not yet been in here to aerate, but I do want to aerate. And I didn't even plan on making a video today, but I looked at my tracking spreadsheet and I noticed that these systems are now 300 days in service. So I figured, perhaps just for the sake of recognizing that, and just to show you how the system's coming along, and to have you along to keep me company while I do the aeration, I thought I'd bring the camera with me. So I'm going to slip on a glove, get these systems up on the bench. We're going to get to aerating the material, and maybe even throw in a little bit of coffee to make sure that there's plenty of food in there to keep that horizontal migration going. So let's get to work. And as long as we're at it, these two bubble wrap plastic covers that we positioned over the horizontal migration feeding zones are a little bit awkward. So I thought that I would also swap these out with just plain old plastic bags, which I think will be a little bit more manageable. And I'll shake these bubble wrap top coverings loose of any castings that might have adhered to them once they've dried off a little bit. But I think just by using plain old plastic bags in the place of these, we'll be in a slightly better position. I just thought I'd take a quick look to make sure we're not leaving any wormies stranded on this stuff, and at this point I think we're good to go. We're even getting a little sneak peek into how the horizontal migration feeding zones look, and I didn't really intend to go too crazy interfering with what's going on over there, but I figured as long as we're going to be maybe reinforcing the feeding in there with a little bit more coffee, perhaps we could even add a little bit more of my prepared bedding, which, as you can see, has been nicely restocked, so we have plenty of that on hand. I guess the other thing we could do while we're at it is we could pick out any of these little bits of debris that have been floating out here on the surface, get them out of the nice collection of lovely worm castings that we're hoping to harvest at some point soon, and get them over into the horizontal migration feeding zones. And then we'll proceed to taking care of the aeration. So this will definitely be the first aeration. So the material in these systems will most certainly still be quite damp, but it does seem to me like leaving the covers off and letting the moisture evaporate away is a good thing. And now that the stuff out here on the surface has had a little bit of a chance to dry, by blending this in with the material below, that too will aid in the drying of the material in general. And while doing it, we also get a little sneak peek as to how the migration of the worms is progressing, just by seeing how many worms still remain in this stuff. And I don't really think it'll take us a very long time, but I figured as long as I was coming down here to do this anyhow, why not just create a quick little video on the subject. A lot of times when I do this, I just deliberately don't even want to mess with the horizontal migration feeding zone. Usually I'll just come down here and do the aeration and not even uncover or look at the horizontal migration feeding zones. But today we will, since I've got a little bit more coffee that we could place in there. I'm assuming that after 6 days, they've probably not done a great deal with what was set up for them over in the horizontal migration feeding zone, but I could be wrong. We could take a peek in there and we could find a huge amount of worms over there already, which would be kind of good news. and good to see. So I've almost managed to aerate all of this stuff. I'm just trying to do it in a kind of slow and methodical way because I would hate to sort of slip and send a whole bunch of this material flying over the edge. I don't really remember just how damp this material was when we started, so I don't really offhand have a good point of reference. Perhaps I'll play back the video from the initial setup of these horizontal migration feeding zones to try to see if I can gauge if we're seeing any improvement in the drying. And there doesn't seem to be a terribly large number of worms in the material. Perhaps we'll be surprised when we peek in the horizontal migration feeding zones and find a good turnout over there. So let's leave the aeration of bin number 1 at that. Seems like things are looking pretty nice over here. We'll give a similar treatment to bin number 2 over here. Once again, trying to do so in a careful way so that I don't have a little mishap sending material flying all over the place. It seems like we got another little piece of something that can go over there. Although, was that even paper or is that some sort of plastic? Yeah, there was something about it. Didn't seem quite right. Perhaps just the vivid brightness of it gave it away that it wasn't even a compostable material and didn't even belong. So I'm glad I zeroed in on that and had the chance to exclude it. I do hope to come back in here and perhaps do 1 or 2 more aerations of this thing off camera. But sometimes I just, don't get around to it, or I just get distracted. Other times I'm pretty diligent and do manage to make time to do it. And it does seem to help a lot. A lot in helping the material get a little bit drier so that the worms are just even that much more motivated to start looking for something a little bit more hospitable. And then we'll get over to the horizontal migration feeding zones and try to gauge whether the space that we created for them over there is in fact hospitable and cozy, such that if they do find themselves there, they'll have a tendency to stay, even though it's a little bit cramped. Usually when I set one of these up with the bedding and moisture and food and everything else over there, compared to what they're living in now, is usually a much better deal, and usually it does work pretty well. So that's the aeration part of it. Just leveling things off a bit, and then we can take a quick peek as to how things look over here. We placed a coffee filter over the feeding zone, which we can place right back where it was after we're finished. Some of these things like this were from feedings gone by and leftovers, and I could see some of the coffee we placed in here, and right here smack in the middle is where the mango would have been put, and I'm just so curious I can't resist poking around to see what's becoming of it. Well, it doesn't seem like much has happened yet. And with all the coffee in here, I'm even questioning whether adding more food today would be necessary. I cut this mango in half, straight through the seed, so that the seed is also there and accessible for worms to play around with, but perhaps they're just not all that into it yet. Here and there I do see nice piles of worms, seemingly enjoying the space we created for them. But you know what? I can't seem to resist, so let's just go for it. I'm going to plop in just a little bit more coffee as long as we're here. And there's something about the moisture content that also seems perhaps a bit lacking, so I think we're going to add some moisture, and perhaps the moisture is really what's going to be the thing that gets the worms to come on over. It's true that the material in the out here in general, the castings material has still got a good moisture content to it. But over time, it'll get drier if I keep to the whole idea of coming in and aerating and helping it dry. So I'll do my best to be diligent on that, but I'm not making any promises. And now over here in bin number 2, we can take another similar approach to seeing how things are happening over here. I think it's probably safe to assume that the mango is probably also in this feeding zone, probably just sitting there without a whole lot of action going on, although, oh, look at that. Perhaps I was wrong. It almost seems to me like bin number 2, the migration is well underway. And as far as the mango goes, perhaps it's really just the juices of the mango at this point that they're attracted to, because it doesn't seem like much of the fruit itself has been nibbled away, but I could be wrong about that. So that was pretty exciting to see. And perhaps the same thing was going on in bin number 1, and maybe I just excavated in the wrong spot and didn't really get the full view of what was happening there. But I am convinced that what we've done here is definitely working the way it was intended, and we can give this system over here a similar treatment with the moisture. And did I give them their little shake of extra food too? Perhaps not much, but what the heck, let's give it to them. And then back in with the moisture, and we'll be more or less finished here. Let's see if I can get some of this stuff on my glove back down where it belongs, or at least part of it. And that to me seems like a pretty good little check-in. Oops. Ringing the bell. Ringing the dinner bell. Come on, guys. Come on and take a nice nibble out of the mango and the coffee, and while you're here, tell your friends to come on by too, because it's such a great place to be. Hopefully you decide to stay. And I think what we've seen here today is probably a pretty good sign as to what to expect here. I think things are coming along quite nicely. Now we can come on with these replacement top coverings that we're going to put in place of the bubble wrap. It just seems like it's a little bit easier to manage and handle. Over on this one, it seemed like the plastic, the bubble wrap, had sort of folded up into space and was no longer even covering a portion of the feeding zone. I definitely want to keep this well covered so that the moisture doesn't get lost to evaporation over here, so that the feeding zone stays as cozy as possible, so that the worms stay put when they arrive. So that's it for our check-in, everyone. 6 days in progress on the 300-day-old African nightcrawler bins undergoing horizontal migration, and hopefully I'll be back in here a couple times to help aerate, keep this stuff on the road to becoming drier and depopulated. So that's it for the check-in, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.